tale of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs begins in the 19th century when the Grimm brothers published the very first version of the story. While it would take many years, eventually Walt Disney would get his hands on the rights to the film in 1937. After earning rights, the story would become Walt's first feature-length film. Walt would hire Dorothy Blank, Richard Creedon, Merrill Damaris, Otto Englander, Earl Hurd, Dick Richard, Ted Sears, and Webb Smith to adapt his storyboard. While no two versions of Snow White are the same, Walt Disney definitely toned down his version of the story for his family-friendly audience. In fact, in the original versions, the dwarves were quite abrupt and rude to Snow White and forced her to cook and clean in order for her protection. Not to mention, in the Grimm's original story, the evil queen doesn't just want Snow's organs as proof that she is dead, but states that she wants her heart, her lungs, and her liver to cook in a meal for her to eat. Snow White first premiered in December of 1937 at Carthay Circle. The premiere would be attended by many celebrities, the stars of the movie, and Walt's close friend Shirley Temple, as well as all of the dwarves. The movie was an instant success and an instant classic, becoming the highest animated grossing film of all time, winning Walt his first Oscar that would be presented to him and Shirley Temple at the 1939 awards. Playing the role of Snow White, leading actress Adriana Caselotti would win the Disney Legends Award, being the first female ever to win the award in 1994 for voice acting. She would also go on to voice Snow White in the attraction in 1983. The history of Snow continues with the history of Disneyland. Snow always had a place in Walt's kingdom, even in the very beginnings of his theme park when he had first purchased the orange groves. You can see here in this early map that Snow is clearly labeled in the Fantasyland section of the park. Most shockingly, Ken Anderson's ride layouts and early drawings looked very similar to what the end game of the attraction looked like on opening day, unlike many of the Fantasyland attractions. The construction on Snow White and her adventures began with the construction of Disneyland and Fantasyland. The exterior was obviously built at the park, and the 3D models and cardboard cutouts would be built off-site. Dedicate an entire segment of his broadcast on ABC to Fantasyland, and especially note Snow White, not only his favorite princess, but his first princess that he had ever created. After Walt's opening day speech, a knight would declare Fantasyland for all the children in the world, leaving the children to rush into Fantasyland and experience the attraction for the very first time. Imagineers Claude Coates, Ken Anderson, and Paul Hartley would take lead on designing the attractions. Ralph Hurrell would oversee the designs for the attractions, and Ferdinand Hovarth, Albert Hunter, Gustav Tannergren would be the artists from the film to oversee the designs. Legendary Imagineer Bob Gurr would design the ride vehicles for the attraction that were originally supposed to look like dwarves from the movie. However, they would eventually become mine carts to hold more guests. Gustav Tannergren would oversee the artistic aspects of Snow White's scary adventures, beginning with the outside of the attraction's mural designed by Paul Hartley and Ken Anderson. The attraction would open on July 17, 1955, with the rest of Disneyland as Snow White and Her Adventures as a C-ticket attraction. This terrifying version of Snow White would have you begin mining for diamonds with the dwarves in their vaults, but end in a terrifying adventure trying to escape the queen from death at many different times. Most parents would, in fact, complain to cast members that the ride was too scary for their children. This was believed to be an issue because of Claude Coates, who worked on the Haunted Mansion. huge complaint for the original attraction was that Snow White was nowhere to be seen. The reasoning behind this was that Walt wanted you to experience the attraction through the character's eyes. Tony Baxter and his team of Imagineers would completely overhaul Snow White and the rest of Fantasyland in 1983, giving Snow White a new facade and completely new interior. On the opening day of New Fantasyland in 1984, the Disneyland ambassador would be joined by Lillian Disney herself to dedicate a plaque to Walt Disney that can now be found on the outside of Sleeping Beauty Castle. The opening of Fantasyland was actually quite extravagant in 1983. Maleficent would show up out of the blue at the castle and try and capture Princess Aurora, leaving Prince Philip to rescue her and save the day. Along with the new attractions, Snow White would finally be seen in her attraction for the first time, voiced by her original voice actress, and as well as getting a new name, Snow White's Scary Adventures, as a way to warn the children and parents. The new outdoor facades of Fantasyland were made to look like a castle courtyard as Walt had originally intended, Snow White specifically featuring the Queen's castle. As you walk by the attraction, if you look up, you can now see the evil Queen lurking over you throughout Fantasyland. You see the first major change to the attraction straight away in the queue, where there is no longer a mural but the outside of the Seven Dwarfs cottage. Enter the attraction and you see Snow White for the very first time heading up to bed, and it is believed that you see the rest of the attraction as if you are in a dream. At the mines, now your first escape from the Queen comes immediately after leaving the cottage. You then catch a quick glimpse of the mines before you have another encounter with the Queen in the beginnings of her dungeons. The Queen has been given many updates in this new revamp to make her look a little bit less terrifying. Would get quite a few updates and new 3D models, as well as the forests that would make them seem quite a bit less terrifying for children. More new brief encounter with the Queen before she would fall to her death off of the cliff, still leaving us with that abrupt ending. Early months of 2020, the attraction finally went down for a long-term overhaul for the first time since 1983. It is said that we will finally be getting that happy ending that we have all been waiting for, and that the scary parts of the ride will be toned down, as well as getting a new facade for the outside of the ride. The history of Snow White is not only vastly important to the Walt Disney Company, but to the film industry as well. Without it, I believe that the animation industry would be vastly behind of what it is today.